Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar about all things Astro with Matthew. Hi, Matthew. How are you doing today?
Hello, how's it going? Glad to be here.
Pretty good. Do you mind introducing yourself just for the folks that don't know you?
Yeah, oh, sure, I'd love to do that. I'm Matthew Phillips. I am a software engineer. I don't know if you want to do a whole background thing, but I've been involved with web for quite a long time, worked on different frameworks, worked on a framework called CanJS for a long time. And I came to Astro maybe like 3 years ago. And actually, we weren't called Astro at the time. We were building a different product called Skypack. And then we started exploring like doing a site builder. We weren't real happy with the site builder we were using at the time, had some issues with it. And we were kind of thinking about how of a way to incorporate some of the things we are doing with Skypack into like a developer's kind of local, their kind of local development. And that kind of spun into what now became Astro. So yeah, I'm one of the co-creators of Astro and been with the project for, I guess it's been a little bit over three years now.
That's really cool. Well, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate that. And before we get in, let's loosen the mood a little bit because it's a coffee chat. So cheers.
Cheers.
And for the folks that don't know me, I'm a coffee snob. So when I travel to conference, I travel with my own coffee gear because I'm not trusting Starbucks coffee anymore. Got burned way too many times. So this is the perfect medium for me. I like this a lot.
Are you like a pour over person?
So last year, I when we moved into this new house, I got a fancy espresso machine. Spent like probably 6 months till I figured that out, how this is supposed to work.
Wow.
And not get like terrible shots. And then last year I started doing pour over. Yeah, I a little bit obsessed.
Wow. I never got that was a bridge too far for me. Pour over is like I don't have time for all that.
Yeah.
I went as far as I like the what's it called, the
AeroPress.
Yeah, the press. Love the press. For some reason, my wife doesn't like the taste of it as much.
It has like a little bit more acidic taste to it. It's great with like lighter roast if you like that, but
yeah, I'm a fan. I love the press.
Yeah, same.
But so we actually use the percolator. So I don't know if that's considered okay or not.
I've not
percolator's
used
okay.
I've heard good things about it, but I've not used it yet.
It's very easy. It's very
cool.
Easy. You might check. I mean, it's nowhere near as cool as what you're doing. But
well, once you're in Kansas City, let me know, and I'm happy to make some coffee for you.
All right, let's do it. Yeah.
Cool. As much as I enjoyed talking about coffee, let's talk a little bit about Astro. How about that? Just a little bit. But before we do that, let's go over a couple slides just to set like the organizational stuff first. In case you have any questions, just drop them in the chat and we will get to that. I'm not awesome at multitasking, so if I miss something, we've got folks in the background not pinging me in case I miss something. So I'll get to that, I promise. And this question is always asked, but yes, this is recorded. This is YouTube. This is how the internet works. Everything stays here. So if you miss something or want to reiterate, go over something again, you can basically use the same URL and you can watch the entire thing over and over again if you want. Having that said, I think we're ready for some code, Matthew. How do you feel about some code?
Let's do some code. Yeah.
Let's do some code. Fancy.
All right. Let me know when you see everything because I can't really see what you see.
Oh, yeah. No, I can see everything. You have a very fancy theme. It has like a little bit like 80s psychedelic vibes to it.
It's Dracula. I always use Dracula. That's my
I see.
It's my everywhere I go. I got to use that.
Cool.
Yeah. So you just want me to kind of intro Astro a little bit. Maybe that's the way to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. So yeah, Astro is a JavaScript framework for building sites, site builder. We got our start doing stack site generation. So if you're looking for a way to build, your blog or maybe your personal site, something where you're going to build a page, then deploy it as HTML. Very easy to deploy static sites. Astro is fantastic for that. That's kind of our, everything's based around that. But eventually, maybe like a year after we started, we were like, well, people are asking for, hey, I want to do stuff, at runtime. Like I want to be able to like look up a user in a database and display information. And static sites are not really the best for that kind of thing. You could figure out a way, but we have support for SSR as well, which just basically means you deploy Astro to your server and you can do whatever you want. Build any type of site with Astro now, right? So it scales from small personal sites to like large applications with dynamic needs and whatnot. But however, so this example I'm showing here is a blog. We have a bunch of different starter apps that you can use depending on what you're trying to build. And this is the blog one. I've modified this a little bit to show off some Astro 3.0 features. But if you're new to Astro, you might like look at this and be like, what is this? It doesn't look like anything I've seen before. And that's because we have our own file format called .astro, as you can see here. Shout out to the WebStorm team for like getting the Astro icons in here in the sidebar and everything. I love that.
Yeah.
So an Astro file consists of like two parts. This part up top, actually, let me see if I can find a better file to show this off. File with some actual code. Yeah, this one has some actual code. You see kind of these tick marks here. We call this the front matter section. And if you've ever dealt with frameworks where you like have some markdown and you might have these ticks and you put like YAML up there for markdown, and it's a pretty common pattern. Actually, there might be one of those in this.
Even though YAML is the worst.
Yeah, YAML is not the best in a lot of ways, but yeah, for these needs, it's not too bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is called front matter. So we kind of adopted that same thing, that same concept with Astro. So you can kind of see, hey, we got the tick marks. This is our front matter section, but it's actually TypeScript. So
I like that.
TypeScript is valid here. So you got your imports. In this case, you can define properties. Maybe I won't get into that right now because it's a little bit advanced for what we're talking about, but you can do a lot. And then below that, you have your template section, which, for anybody that's written in the HTML, this is pretty straightforward. It is JSX-like in that you have, you can, insert variables from your front matter. So we have like a title that we're defining here. We can now use that by inserting it here. You can do advanced things like here we're like creating a URL. You can have an array. You can do .math. You can do all sorts of things. So anything you can, if you're familiar with JSX, you have the same power to do whatever you need. The difference.
Sorry to chime in here, but I do like this a lot because usually when you have like client-side frameworks, it's very hard to manipulate the header section where you have to do like DOM manipulations or something, or actually use like document APIs to get to that. So having this in a static way here where you can just still use JSX is really cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah. It is JSX-like, but we actually building our compiler for Astro. We forked an HTML parser, so it actually is valid HTML, which is a little bit different from a JSX.
So kind of like the Angular approach to things. I like that even more.
Maybe. Yeah, you can like write scripts. You can't do this in JSX. You'd have to have a string inside and stuff like that. But you can do that in Astro, so it's pretty cool. So yeah, that is the basic and Astro syntax, I would say. Getting a little bit more into it, the way that you build sites in Astro is we have a folder called Pages, and Astro utilizes something called, let me bring up this page. It utilizes something called file-based routing. So for those that are not familiar, it basically means that you have a folder with all of your routes, and the framework kind of crawls this folder to figure out, okay, you got a blog route, you have an index route and about route, and your URLs will match the file structure that you've laid out. So this prevents you from having to like configure routes and, like with Express, you have to do it all in code and that sort of thing. Just a pretty common pattern if you've used Next.js or something like that. You're probably pretty familiar. So yeah, that's where all the pages, anything inside pages can be an Astro file. So that gives you the ability to do dynamic stuff like we're doing here. You can also put markdown files inside of pages. This is maybe not so common now, and I'll explain in a minute, but in the past, it was pretty common to do it that way because if you wanted to have your blog post, well, you just add a file to pages, and you can do it that way. You still can do it that way, but there's some disadvantages of that, which I can share here in a moment. But you can also have JS files or TypeScript files for that matter. And these are used for kind of your API endpoints if you're going to have those. So if you were doing something like, you have, I don't know, you're building a to-do list, right? You might have an API to like fetch to-dos and that sort of thing. You would do that in .js files or .astro files, or excuse me, .ts files.
I was just about to say that, but
well, you actually can do it in .astro, but I won't get into that. One thing that's cool here is that we're actually using what we call an API route to do RSS. So that's a feature that we have built into Astro as well. There's an RSS package. You create an API endpoint, and it's going to return the RSS. You can kind of get all the things that you need to have.
Oh, and does it infer the method with the get here based on the method name in line 5 where it says function get?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could have get, post, any method that you want to have.
Cool. Oh, that's awesome. Before you continue, we already got the first question. Yeah. I would like to chime in just because it's I like that question a lot. So James is asking, how intuitive is this to learn if you're coming from other frameworks?
I assume they mean like the Astro syntax or just in general?
Astro in general. That's at least how I read this.
Yeah, I think if you're coming from other frameworks, like especially the file-based routing should feel very familiar because 11e does that. Like I said, Next.js does that, Nux does that. Any of those do that. Another feature I haven't talked about, which is a huge thing in Astro actually, which I don't know if we have highlighted in this app. We don't actually, but you can use other frameworks within Astro. So Astro is like a multi-framework, meta framework is what they call it. And what that means is we have plugins for React and Vue and Svelte, etc. Astro is just the kind of Astro syntax is just the server side part. Client side, we don't try to, we're not trying to compete with client side frameworks. So if you wanted to use React or Svelte or Vue, etc., you can install a plugin and then you can kind of use those. So you'd be able to do something like, let me just write up some pseudocode. You could have, let's say, Svelte. Oh, didn't mean to bring that up. Counter.svelte. And then you could use that. You could use a component here. And you can use like a Svelte component just like any other. So it's kind of different from other frameworks in that you kind of mix and match. But by default, Astro is 0.js is what we say. So we don't add JavaScript unless you tell us to. So we have these special directives, for example, client load, and that tells Astro, hey, I want to load this component in the client. And there's different ones. There's client load, there's client idle, and this kind of specifies when we want this to load. Idle means don't load it until the browser's idle. There's special methods that the browser can use to tell you that. There's a client visible as well. And what that will do is it won't load this component. Like if this were like farther down the page, we would not load this component until the user had actually scrolled down to that. So we have various ways that you can load. I mean, we have a fancy one called, this is one of my favorite actually, client media. And then you can do like min width 900 pixels.
Oh, like a media query. Oh, it's cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you have a use case for that would be, hey, I have this sidebar, or I have, like a sidebar, but I only want to show that for desktop users. Well, you could use a media query and it would never even load for people
really cool.
on mobile.
So just from my understanding, that means everything that is a .astro file basically runs on the server and just puts out static HTML in the end, and everything that is like some framework code in the end
exactly
ends up in the runtime code.
Yeah. Anything
Cool.
that's actually you can actually use framework components for like most of your backend code as well. We think the Astro syntax is a really nice one. It's really, we built it for the purpose of server-side rendering. But if you're like, hey, I really like React or whatever, you can actually just have a bunch of React components. You still do need to use .astro for your pages, but there's no reason why you couldn't like move all this into your React component or whatnot. Some people do it that way.
But I mean, then Astro is like perfect for like big corporates where you have like different component libraries and different flavors. Some use like React, some use Angular, maybe. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Before we continue down that rabbit hole, because I'm super curious about that, my colleague Paul asked if client components if they are actually web components, or do we require a runtime framework? And you touched on that that you can use React and stuff, but can you use web components too, like lit components, how's it called, stencil, something like that?
Yeah. So like lit, we actually have an integration for, so you can use lint, just the same way you'd use a framework component. I mean, we have a special API for anyone can build their own what we call these renders, but they're like plugins for Astro essentially. So you could support any sort of component library that you want to use. I mean, obviously, if you're doing like a web component, you could literally just add your script tag, and it would work. You don't really need Astro's help a lot of the time there, but maybe you want to use it because we have these special, you want to do it with a media query. Like that's kind of one of the things
that is a really cool feature. Yeah.
Cool. I'm glad you like it because I think it's one people forget about.
So I remember browsing over the page with like what you can do with like the client directive, and I don't remember seeing that, or my ADD brain just ignored it, or I don't know, but that's very strong feature. That's really cool.
Specialized use case.
It is, but if you need it, you really need it. Awesome. I love that. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. Let's continue with your presentation about what Astro is all about.
Okay. So this is, I kind of showed off the syntax, explained how you can use framework components. And the main reason why you might want to use a framework component, of course, is that you want to have interactivity, right? Like you want to have the user, like let's say you're building an e-commerce website. You want the user to be able to add something to the cart and without refreshing the page. And you want like, you have that cart component and you want that to show, oh, now you have one item in the cart, that sort of thing. So that's the main reason you use framework components. But if you're building something like a blog, maybe you don't have any client-side JavaScript at all. And actually in this app, we don't have any. And so I want to show off like how you might build a blog a little bit. So a blog would consist of, you have like your index page, maybe you're kind of explain, oh, hey, I'm Matthew Phillips, this is my blog, etc. Or you have an about page, which kind of does all that. But the meat of the content is in, the actual blog post, right? So you're going to have something like a listing of blog posts, which we have in this example. And this is going to get into some of the more advanced routing. I'll explain it all though, but over time, like I mentioned before, like you can just add markdown files. Like I could just add markdown files in the post, but what you want to do a lot of time is you want to like query your blog post to say like, oh, I want to get, the title and I want to display a list, right? Or you want to have like more advanced thing is I want to have a author section. So, I have multiple authors on this particular blog and I want to be able to go to all of Matthew's posts. So you get to, if you kind of see what I'm saying, you kind of get into like these advanced querying needs.
Yeah.
And that's not something you can kind of easily do with just having a bunch of files. You need structure, right? You need a way to define like what are the parameters of my blog? Like what are the parts that matter? Like how do they relate to each other? That sort of thing. So we have this API called content collections, and you can kind of see that being used here. So Astro has some, like, we have our own built-in modules that we define. One of those is Astro content, and use that to like query content. So content is stored in this source/content folder, and we have a configuration file where you define kind of what we call a collection. So a collection would be any kind of folder of similar type of items, right? And collections have a schema. And so this is kind of the schema definition. We're saying that we have a title, it's a string. We have a description, it's a string. We have a pub date, the publication date, that's a date object, etc. So you define all those things, and then in your content itself, let me just bring this up. We see that we have a title, a description, a publication date, an image. And one of the things that's really cool about doing it this way, now that we've given it structure, is that these are actually going to be great error messages. As you can see, this hero image is optional, but if we were to make this not optional, now you would be required to show a hero image. And if you didn't show a hero image, you'd actually get an error. Like in development mode, you get an error that says, hey, you haven't defined a hero image. So it's a nice way to like make sure that your content matches, expectations. If you were to have a typo in description, that would be an error, obviously, right? Because you have defined what the schema is here.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of strong typing, so that makes my coding heart very happy.
Yeah. It's all, you use this library called Zod under the hood. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a really nice library for defining schemas and this sort of thing. You can like do these transforms and all these really cool stuff. So
yeah, Zod is very powerful also with like intersection types and all those fancy TypeScript things. It's pretty cool.
So yeah, we have your content here. You can also use MDX, which I don't think I've installed my MDX plugin. I should probably do that here soon, but I'm not gonna do it on the call. But MDX is a format that you can use to like import components and that sort of thing. So if you have, like, for example, our docs site, our documentation website is built with Astro, obviously. And we use MDX a lot because we have like different little widgets. Like we have a widget that says when a feature was released, if you're like looking up, how to use a feature, it says, oh, this is available in Astro 2.5 or something like that. So that's a component. You might have various different needs. So MDX is great for that. You kind of get the power of component libraries, but you get to mix it with Markdown as well. So that's fully supported in content collections. Okay, last part.
Before you go on, question time.
Okay, let's go.
Brent asks, what is the correct way to integrate an arbitrary CSS framework like Pico's CSS? I think Tailwind will go in a similar direction, things like that.
CSS?
Yes, like a CSS framework.
Yeah, it really depends on the framework. I mean, I'm not familiar with Pico, but like Tailwind, we have an integration. Like it's very built into Astro. You can, let's just do it right now. Why not? In my terminal here, I can say npx Astro add Tailwind. Let's see how it goes. We actually, and it says, oh, look, we need to install this Astro Tailwind. I'm going to say yes. It's going to install this stuff for me. It's going to verify. It's going to let me know that it's going to install these files. And now I have Tailwind. If I go back to my Astro config, we have a config file for Astro. It's already added it to my list of integrations. So
cool.
For something like Tailwind, very, very easy. It really depends. Sometimes the CSS framework is like literally just a CSS file. So you can add it that way. Yeah, it really depends on what you're doing.
Depends. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, cool. There's just a couple of things I want to talk about before we get to questions, and then we can spend the rest of the time doing questions. Yeah, just kind of round out the idea of content collections. Eventually, you want to query your content, and we're doing that here. We have this method called getStaticPaths. If you're building a static site, this is the way that you tell Astro, these are all my pages for something that's dynamic. So we're going to query the collection of blog posts, and this is all type checked, by the way. And we can see that there's a slug associated with that. And then we're able to use that content and actually display our blog posts. So pass all of that in, and now we got our blog posts here. So yeah, this content collection is a way to like both organize your content and also like query that in different ways.
Yeah.
And display it.
That's cool. I like that a lot. Because this way you could also easily build references between them. Like you said earlier, like, okay, a blog post can maybe have multiple authors or something like that.
Yeah.
So you,
and then
sorry.
No, that's exactly right. You're able to define kind of these relationships between your data. So you might have a collection of authors, which are, you can also have collections of JSON files, for example. So you might have a JSON file for like each author, each person on your team, and they have like a headshot image, right?
Yeah.
And they have maybe a description of themselves. And then you can associate that with which blog post. So it's almost like a database, right? You have tables that are able to link to each other. Yeah, so the only other thing I'm going to show code-wise was view transition. So I don't know if we want to pivot into Astro 3.0 talk quite yet.
Let's ask there's one more question, and then let's jump over to view transition, because it's at least a topic that I'm super interested in. All the presentation I've seen so far looks super fancy. But about the question, my colleague Paul again asked, I love the richer content model. It's something I miss when moving from Gatsby to Eleventy, which we're doing for our personal, or like our company blog right now. That's not quite true. It's a guide. I'm sorry, Paul, in case you're still watching. So he's asking, does Astro have a build phase that can be hooked in? Because we're doing a lot of things at build time that we can then use to validate certain things. How does Astro handle things like that? And Gatsby had something like that too.
Okay, so is it you all used to use Gatsby for this project?
We used to use Gatsby, and for a variety of reasons that I don't want to super go into now, we decided a year ago, I think, to move over to Eleventy.
Gotcha. Okay. I am like pretty familiar with all of these frameworks, but I'm not an expert in any of them. So when you say build phase, I don't know exactly what you mean, but we do have there is a build phase, and we have different hooks. So you can like hook into like the different phases of the build process. Astro is built on top of Vite, so if people are familiar with Vite, it is it's a build tool, it's a build and development tool, and so there's like a lot of plugins for Vite, so you can kind of use all those things as well.
Cool. Yeah, one thing we, for instance, do, just to give you like a reference, is we take the schema definition that kind of like the ones you had in Zod to generate JSON schemas that we can then use to have like squiggly lines in the JSON files for our content. So if a user would create a new blog post, but they're missing the title, they would get like a red squiggly line already in the IDE. That is basically the idea we have.
Okay, so you can like that. You kind of get that for free with Astro. I'm not sure. So
you get it at runtime. You don't get it at like IDE level, right? With Zod.
No, you do, because Astro generates a TypeScript definition file. So yeah, like this is all generated. This is not something you write. So if you look at this, like it has your post, and it has like what the types are supposed to be and everything. So yeah, I should clarify. If your IDE supports this sort of thing, it can do it. I don't know how we probably should figure out a way to integrate this with.
I was just saying that looks so cool. I want this in my IDE.
But yeah, it is possible. I mean, like we haven't added IDE support. Yeah, I shouldn't say we support it in theory.
Yeah,
we don't support it. It really depends on the IDE supporting it. But yeah, that is potential for that, because we actually have the definitions and everything. So yeah, that's something that we're really excited about as well.
I will go and create a Utrecht ticket after this for that. That's super cool.
Yeah, it really matters that it's able to read. So I mean, it works in Astro files because Astro is just TypeScript, so it actually reads that TypeScript. So it's really like the Markdown needs to know to read the TypeScript. So there's probably some work to do there to make that work, but it is totally possible.
But that's cool. I like that a lot. We do have more questions, but I don't want to switch too much. So maybe let's talk about view transition, and then let's get through all the questions so that
So yeah, I can just quickly do this. Astro is actually, I'm going to turn off view transitions just for fun. And I'll kind of show the experience, the difference here. Astro is what we call a MPA framework, so multi-page apps. What that means is it doesn't have a client-side router by default. When you actually click a link, you're actually going to go back to the server, load all HTML, the old school way that people don't do as often anymore. And we go find this component. I can turn off view transitions to show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to start the dev server again. And I have that running here, except the port is different. Uh-oh, I messed up my, by installing Tailwind, I think I messed with my styles. I'm going to turn that off. Let's see. There we go. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it looks somewhat better now.
So you click the link, we're actually loading a whole new page, which is, fine for a blog and stuff like that. Oops. It is perfectly fine, right, to navigate this way. But if you're doing something, if you want to have like animations or like maybe you have like a media player, that sort of thing, like you really don't want to get the full page navigation. So we have a new feature in Astro called view transitions. And if you're not familiar with that term, there's a new browser API called view transitions, and we kind of just named our thing after. So what you can do is we have this special component called view transitions from Astro transitions. You import that, put it somewhere kind of in the head of your document. And then once you do that, let me just refresh. Now you can kind of see, do you see the kind of the slide in and slide out that's happening here? Now, if I click on this one's really cool. I really like this. That image, you kind of get that nice little animation. I'll click on this one. It comes up, back, forth. I could do this all day. This is just kind of like fun to play around with. And I'm not a very good designer, so you can make it look a lot cooler than this.
It's not good for my ADD brain, and in case I need to procrastinate more, because I could just sit all day and look at that animation. That's very smooth.
Yeah. So anyways, there's this API called view transitions, and it's a browser API. And Astro, we for a long time, people have said, hey, we want to have client-side routing in an Astro app. Can you do that for us? And we've been like, I'm not really sure if it's really a great fit, etc. And then when view transitions came around, we were like, wow, this really, for a thing like a blog, this is really, really nice. And so we wanted to try to integrate with that as deeply as possible. And we just kind of show you the power that you have here.
But so that means once you use view transition, everything is client-side rendered then from there on, or where's the split now?
No, it's still server-side rendered, but it's client-side routing. So it means that the client is kind of, what happens is the client intercepts a link, like you click on a link, it's going to fetch the real page from the server and then bring it in and kind of transition to between pages, right? Using the view transition API. So yeah, it's all
head hurts a little bit now, but I think I got it.
Yeah, you can call it client-side rendering, but it's not like your Astro components are not rendering in the client. They're still rendering on the server, but the HTML is just kind of swapped, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Right. So with Astro, we have these special directives called transition, transition:, and with those, we have different ways you can kind of customize how a particular element transition. So if I just kind of go back, so if you notice when I click on these links, you notice kind of this section kind of slides. You kind of see that slide effect.
Yep.
And that is because on the root HTML, we've kind of defined a slide animation. So we've basically said we want this entire thing to slide, right?
Okay.
And, if I go back, it slides from the left to the right. When I go forward, it slides from the right to the left, etc. So you get kind of directional sliding. But you also notice that this up here, this section does not slide, right? Like that stays in place.
Now that you say it.
Yeah, and that's because in my header component, I've defined transition animate none. So you can actually say, I want the page to slide, but for this particular thing, I don't want any animation. So you kind of get that granularity where you can have some elements slide. We have a fade effect. Let me just try that one real quick and see.
Oh, so you also come, or Astro comes with built-in animations already. So the slide that you is not your slide. Okay, cool.
Yeah, the slide is, you know, it's like when we navigate the blog, we get a slide, and that's because the blog has a slide, but the homepage doesn't now. I removed it. You still just get a fade. So yeah, we have fade and slide are our two built-in ones. You can write, you can actually, let me just kind of show, you can import from Astro transitions. There's a slide function you can import, and so you can use that here. And then slide, you can like define, like you can see it's already auto-completing for me, duration of the slide. So I'm going to say like, I think if I do 2000, I think it's in milliseconds. Let's try this.
So it would be 2 seconds. That should be slowish. Yeah.
Very slow.
That's how my CSS animation looked like, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And you notice like we get different animations. So on different pages can have different kind of animations. Like my blog is just using the regular slide. So I could add what you often do in Astro is you have what you call a layout. So kind of like your main HTML content is all in one file, and then like each page uses that layout, right? This blog doesn't use that, but that's the way that if you want all of your pages to kind of have the same animation, you would kind of put that common code in a layout. But anyways, yeah, we get this 2-second animation. So you have basically full control. You don't have to do a slide. There's like an API for this. Like you can do an object. I'm not going to do it all here, but you can say like, I can't even remember. Yeah, I think old. So you can like define, I want the old page to do this kind of animation. I want the new page to do this. You basically have full control to do whatever you want.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so that's basically what view transitions is. But yeah, it's really, really nice.
It's pretty fancy. I like it a lot. Cool. Thanks again. Thanks a lot, Matthew. Let's go over some questions. Obviously, my favorite question by far: how well does the JetBrains IDE work with Astro? I will cover that question. Don't worry about it.
So works pretty good.
Yeah, it seems good. Now we added support for Astro in 2023.1, so beginning of the year, I think. So if you use a modern version of WebStorm or other JetBrains IDEs, we support Astro. You have to install a plugin, and then you get like the syntax highlighting and all those things. As we just learned, there are things to improve. So if you run into anything, create a U-Track ticket. I will create a U-Track ticket after this for the Zot schema integration, because I will love that feature.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that. When did you all add support?
Beginning of the year, this year.
Okay. Yeah. See, content collections, we came out at the beginning of this year, so I think there's a lot of things, especially you probably started working on it much before that. There's probably a lot of features that we added, since you all have done your thing, and there's probably some deeper integrations that we could do together. We have our own like language tools person who knows all of this stuff, right? So we could probably have her work with you all about how to make some.
Yeah, and we have very good collaboration between WebStorm and Astro. So thanks a lot. Shout out to everyone involved. This is a very successful collaboration. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Cool. Let me clean this up. Next question. And I was actually wondering the same, but is it possible to change themes in Astro after the project was initialized with one theme?
Yeah, so we don't really have, I would say, so a theme in Astro is really just kind of a template.
Right.
We don't have like if you use like WordPress where you can like do a drop down to like change your theme and kind of thing, like we don't really have that support yet. That is something that I haven't
heard that in a while. Sorry.
That is something we're interested in, but yeah, it really depends on the theme that you're using. There's a lot of third-party integrations for Astro and people who are developing themes. I think if you go to astro.build/integrations, maybe they kind of look in the header there. You can kind of get a list of like different themes and stuff you can install. So it really depends on the theme. It could be a bit of work though, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, in particular, that site you mentioned is pretty cool. I use it as well because you can say like, hey, I want TypeScript integration. I want Markdown support. I want Tailwind, which I personally like. So it already filters that for you, and it's pretty cool. There are some themes already that look really nice, particularly for people like me who are fantastic in CSS. Fantastic. Cool. Okay. Question I have for you, Matthew.
All right, let's go.
Now that you're on the team, you're on this call. So what is planned for Astro in the future? I mean, view transition looks awesome, but what's coming? What's the next big thing?
Yeah, no, it's kind of funny because we joke that like I wish there was like a new view transition like every 6 months or something, because like it's been a really big success for us. People have really liked it.
Yeah.
I think it's in the year. We're actually working on something called Astro Studio that we teased like last month. So Astro Studio, I'm like trying to think like what am I allowed to say that it is?
I won't tell anybody, so just
Astro Studio is a way to like organize your content. Is kind of it will be
so like a
paid
CMS
product. It's maybe a little bit like that, yeah. Maybe or might have some not exactly right. We want to it's more database. It's not really maybe not exactly like a CMS. Actually, I don't. There's lots of things I don't actually know. So if it sounds like I'm being coy, it's really like I'm trying to think about like what is this product. No, so that's a big thing probably next. I kind of showed how you organize your content for in the content folder, and that's great. At a certain point, you're creating your own blog or whatever. But if you have a really big team, you really need a better way to organize it, and a way that scales as well. So that's kind of what we're working on there. Another big thing we're working on is support for incremental builds. So
fancy topic.
Yeah, I don't know
if you now say signals and fine-grained reactivity, I'm probably going to do a table flip, but yeah, keep going.
No, I'm not saying that. Incremental build is just essentially like let's say you have a site with 50,000 blog posts. That can actually take a little bit of time because Astro, especially you have like MDX. Like MDX is literally just JavaScript. So we have to like compile all this stuff, and it can take a lot of time. So we're working on the ability to incrementally do a build. So if you like add a new blog post, well, all the old blog posts have not changed. So we're not going to go back and actually rebuild all of them. We're just going to build kind of the new post, right? So it should speed up builds significantly. We're also looking into doing like a dev overlay. This is still kind of a work in progress, but it's kind of like our own version of a dev tools. So you'd have the ability to, in development mode, like click a button and it might do like an accessibility audit of your page and like let you know, oh, you forgot to add an alt to this image, that sort of thing.
I like that a lot. I'm often the accessibility guy on our team, so I'm like pointing out like, hey, like using the title of the blog post here as an alt tag is really not cool. So I love that. And actually Astro has a really great accessible theme already, just in case people are looking for that. This is what I use for the blog post, my personal blog post right now that I'm working on.
Cool. I was gonna say I can keep going. There's a bunch of stuff we're working on.
Yeah, you seem busy. Jesus.
We like to ship things. Yeah. We have a lot of smaller things too, but yeah, those are kind of the I would say the bigger things.
How big is the Astro team? Because you have a couple of very public faces. But how many people are involved with Astro?
I'm not even going to try to count. We probably have like a dozen people on our core team.
That's cool.
Which some people are part time, some people are full time. But yeah, we're pretty good sized team.
Yeah, cool. All right. Brand is asking, will there be a way to externalize the MDX so that content collections are now working with a headless CMS?
Yeah, I don't know, that's kind of, I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I know that there are CMS integrations already. Like
Oh.
there's integrations for, I'm trying to think, maybe, I'm not sure if Contentful has one, but
I think I've seen an integration for Contentful now thinking about it.
Yeah, there are some integrations for a few CMSs. I haven't really used those myself, so I can't tell you if they support MDX or not. I think, yeah, MDX is kind of a difficult one to do. My guess would be probably not, right? Because usually a headless CMS kind of has their own, component system, if you will. So yeah, it's MDX. I don't know. I think maybe in the future we are interested in that. We actually have support for MarkDoc. I don't know if you've heard of that, but MarkDoc is another format which is kind of like a competitor to MDX, if you will, but it's really designed to be scale better than MDX.
Okay.
MDX is, so that's another option. Maybe we'll support that. But yeah, it's kind of TBD on that one, I think.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, I would imagine MDX to be difficult because, I mean, during the compilation of the Markdown document, you would need to figure out what components are under the hood.
You have to, you kind of it has to be part of your complete site build, right? Because it can reference any file in your site.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. If I remember the blog post for Astro 3, by the way, shout out for your guts of using a release candidate for this entire presentation. That bold move.
Am I using the release candidate?
Yeah, in the beginning it said somewhere like RC8 or something in the terminal.
Yeah. Well, it's because I was using this project to really test when I was working on view transitions.
You just have a very high trust in the quality of Astro. and I appreciate that. If I remember the blog post,
the breaks, I can fix it. So
if I remember the blog post correctly, you also announced a collaboration with Vercel and Next.js. How does that look?
Oh yeah. So not with Next.js, with Vercel.
Okay, Vercel.
No, that's all good. Vercel is kind of our official hosting partner for Astro. And so yeah, I mean they give us money into our open collective, which our open collective goes towards community members who go above and beyond.
Well, that's cool.
People who are like, active in support and helping other people. Like we will give prizes and that sort of thing. So all the money that they give us goes into our open collective. And then we've kind of built some deeper integrations for some features with Vercel. For example, Vercel has something called Edge middleware, and which is kind of a cool option. So what that means is you can write middleware, which Astro has a feature called middleware, and deploy that middleware to the edge. So if you want to do something like you want to do routing where if the user is in a different language, you could route them to the correct page using Edge middleware. And because it's deployed to the edge, it's going to be very fast, right? Because you kind of get that request. So that's like one of the features we added. We also added support for function per route, which means that we could like split a build so that each of your pages is a different function. And there's kind of some benefits to doing that. So we've kind of been working with Vercel to like take advantage of their platform and like really build good features for it.
Do you have also some integration into their build process? Because I remember they have some like preview mode and all those fancy kind of log things, analytics, or is it more like on a platform level right now?
Yeah, we have some of that. We don't have what is it called? We actually do have. We have Vercel Analytics. Like they contribute code. They've been contributing code as well. Cool. I'm not as familiar with that, but like I think my understanding is like basically anything you can do with Vercel Analytics, you can do with Astro now. We also have support for their image service. So Vercel has like a really nice image service that you can integrate with. So basically, I didn't really talk about this, but we also introduced a image component.
Oh yeah.
And so you can have like images in your project, and those will get optimized for you by Astro. And so you can like specify different sizes, you can specify different formats, that sort of thing.
Is it a runtime optimization with like, okay, this is the space you have, or is it a compile time? Well, like, hey, we can actually do some compression on this or something like that, or is it both?
Yeah, yeah, well, it can be at runtime and build time as well. So if you're building a static site, it's going to be build time, but this can happen, dynamically. So you could have like a user upload their avatar and then compress that. So with the Vercel integration, you can actually use their service rather than like running it locally.
Yeah,
which is there's some benefits to doing that.
Yeah, wow, that's cool. I mean, for like any content-rich site, like images is always a big problem.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm very lazy about like I'll just be like I'm just gonna upload the PNG and then I look at it and it's like 2 megabytes. I'm like, oh shoot, I need to actually. So it's really nice that the image just kind of does that for you.
Yeah, for our guide, we had like videos in MP4 and some of them were like 20 max. And we're like, well, let's maybe jump to a different format. And we switched to WebM and it had like 200 kilobyte or something.
Yeah, it's
so, yeah, images and all that thing is fun. It's great.
Another thing I should mention is that we're actually getting ready to we have an image component, but we're actually introducing a picture component as well. So if you have, I'm not, picture component is so complicated is one thing I've learned, but you can like specify different formats and that sort of thing, and it will write out the picture element. So there's kind of some advanced use cases that you'll soon be able to do.
So I'm not a native speaker, but how do you differentiate between a picture and an image?
So there's a picture element, HTML element, and there's the image element too. So the picture element allows you to specify multiple sources. So you could have like one use case is to have fallback, like, oh, I want to use WebP, but if the browser doesn't support WebP, fall back to JPEG or something like that. But you can do some crazy stuff with picture element, like you can specify media queries. It's pretty advanced. So we're trying to.
Literally never heard of that.
Yeah, it's a pretty advanced feature, which is why we didn't support it from day one. But yeah, we're trying to find a way to do so.
That's cool. Huh. Today I learned.
so many things out there.
Yeah, clearly. So you touched on that in the beginning, that Astro has support for a lot of UI frameworks like React, Svelte, and all those things. We're in the front end world. So realistically, tomorrow a new UI framework pops up out of nowhere. What is needed from your end to say, okay, we support a new UI framework now, in terms of like process-wise, but also technical-wise? Because it seems for my framework developer brain, it seems like very difficult to be like, hey, we want to render this React component next to this Svelte component, and React doesn't have a compiler, Svelte needs a compiler. So how do you do this?
Like, how would you like if you were an inventor of a new framework and you wanted to like let it work in Astro, like what would you do?
Correct.
Okay, cool. I was gonna say maybe I can show some code. Let's dip into node modules. Why not?
Yeah, because that's always a great idea.
Yeah, what will we find? Do I even have one? No, I'm gonna
install log and debug statements.
Astro add. I'm just gonna do Svelte. Why not? So this is how you can install them as a user. So basically, we have specialized APIs for this. So as the developer of this thing, I'm just going to open up the Svelte one. Let's see if this looks good at all. We have these special APIs that you have to implement. One of them, there's like one called check, and check passes you a component because we don't know actually, right? You import a component. Like we can't just rely on the file extension to know that it's a Svelte component, because it might be coming from a package or something. So we have this method check. We pass you the component, and this is kind of checking, oh, if it has the $$ render, this is a Svelte component.
I see.
And then from that, Astro will then call this function, and this is basically your render function. So it's a pretty small amount of code to integrate with, the framework already has this ability. In case of Svelte, you call a component.render, you pass in some props, and now you get the HTML. So it's a pretty small interface to, give us back HTML, essentially, is it.
Cool. That is surprisingly easy. I expected a much more complicated answer, to be quite honest.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, some of the integrations are pretty complicated. So I'm glad that I picked Svelte because it's actually really small.
Good pick.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot. That was interesting. Again, I expected it to be.
Yeah, and there's also a client portion of it as well. So there's this other. If the user uses client load or something like that, we need to load that in the client. So it's a very similar API. In case of Svelte, you call new component, etc. So yeah, very, very similar.
Cool. That's impressive. I assume that the framework at this point already needs to support Vite to some extent, or that doesn't matter?
It definitely helps because especially if you have your own file format. Let me see if this.
I mean, Svelte has Svelte files, right?
Svelte has Svelte files. I don't even know. There's also where is this? Let me see. See, you do need to integrate with Vite to some extent. Svelte has its own Vite plugin that integrates with Vite in order to compile it and all that sort of thing. So you probably do need to write that as well if you're doing your own file format. If you're doing something like JSX, maybe it's a little bit easier because Vite can already compile JSX. But yeah, there's some amount of integration with Vite necessary.
Yeah, cool. All right. I think we're ready to wrap up. So let me.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, this was
time flew by. Yeah.
Thanks again, Matthew. This was great. I learned a lot about Astro that I didn't know, even though I used it already for a little bit. So this was great. I very much appreciate you joining us. Again, this whole thing will be recorded, so in case you want to jump back to anything Matthew showed, just click the video and watch it again. Once we switch to the slides, look at that was basic, so smooth. Here's some contact details. Make sure to follow Matthew in case you want to learn all things Astro. And one minor personal thing, somewhat personal, we do have our JetBrains JavaScript Day on the 2nd of November, where one of your colleagues will also talk about Astro. And I think it's about view transition. I think we have Fred talk about view transition. So make mark November 2nd in your calendar and join us for that. This is going to be great. And do I have another slide? I do have another slide. I knew that because I'm prepared. The usual YouTube thing. Make sure to hit the bell and subscribe button, and thanks for joining. Appreciate it. And thank you, Matthew.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.